All right, welcome to another demonstration primarily using Lightroom. Actually, I think in this one we're exclusively going to use Lightroom to work on our shot. We may bring in a third-party plugin to add a little bit of spice to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 6 shots done in this panoramic, and you can see them up here on the screen, and we're going to turn them into this. So quite a bit difference, but it really makes it work. So let's start with the process. So I've got these 6 shots here of this panoramic stitch. And this, by the way, was taken on a panoramic head rotating around the nodal point. It was actually shot with a Fotopro E7 tripod with a gimbal head. And you can see, even just looking as we go left or right to left, that the images already kind of seem to line up. But before we do the stitching part, what we're going to do is we're going to take one of the middle images of the scene, one of the cascades here, and we're going to do an edit to this first. So let's go up to the Develop module. I'm going to do Basic Edit. Now, you don't have to do it this way. You could stitch it first and then do your edit. But I just find before I make the decision to go ahead and do a panoramic stitch that it's helpful to get the primary subject in line, and then we can sync that. And we can further fine-tune it afterwards. So we take a look at this, and it's kind of flat, as most raw files are as they come in, but we can see from the histogram that the exposure for all intents and purposes is perfect. We have a little bit of pure black in it right now. If we come up to the histogram in the upper right, this is the black clipping warning. And you can see it's not quite clipping. It's saying that it's getting close. And it's underneath here. If we just kind of hover over it, you can see it shows this area under this rock is almost black. Well, guess what? It probably really is almost black. So we're not going to concern ourselves with that, but the histogram is very good. However, I do want to open up the shadows and bring the highlights down. So it gives us a little bit more room to adjust the exposure. So let's bring the highlights down. Make our water a little dull. We're going to bring our shadows all the way up to open up those deep shadows. And then that gives us a little bit of room on the right side of the histogram up here to boost the exposure a little bit, to add a little bit more life into there. Great. So that's looking better. Yes, it's still flat. Now we have to add some flavoring down here. So we'll come down to Presence. I'm going to add some texture and some clarity. And this did come in very flat, so I'm going to just cut to the chase. I'm going to add a bunch of saturation and vibrance. And that's really more what it looked like. I just shot this, so this is fresh in my mind. And I think that's about all I need to do for it for now. Yes, there's going to be some light painting we're going to do. May do some sharpening at the end, but I'm going to save that because if you go into sharpening right away, even though the image needs it, it does have a tendency to cause the most distortions in an image if you go high. Even if we then add the masking, hold down the Alt or Option key, and just do the very edges, then that helps a bit. So now if we zoom in, let's take a look at it at 50% so we give it a chance to draw in. And actually that's not looking too bad. The leaves are nice and sharp on the rocks as the water falls around it. So that's looking pretty good already. So what we can do is hold down the Shift key. I'm going to come over to the last image in the group. That will select all of them. If we then hold down Command on a Mac, right-click on a Windows machine, and go to the left, we can add those and still keep the ones on the right. So now we've got all 6 of these selected, and we can simply come over to Sync down the bottom, and we want everything. Now, crop isn't checked, but we haven't done any cropping, so let's click on Synchronize, and that will show us all of our images now with those same adjustments. So you can see left to right. As we go through, there's the entire scene. Great. So now it's ready to stitch. So I've got them all highlighted. Let's come up to Photo, Photo Merge, Panorama. All right, so here's our image. Now you can see there's a slight bit of curvature on the left and right, top and bottom. And that's a default because the software assumes you're hand holding. But since we were on a nodal point rotation on our panoramic, none of this is necessary. It didn't actually happen. So we can just take the boundary warp and automatically bring it all the way over, and you can see it straightens out the image nicely. Now there are three choices up here. Perspective you're rarely going to use. It only really works in certain street scenes, at least in my experience. But you can check cylindrical and spherical. Now spherical is going to compress vertically. Can be very handy if you're shooting down on something. But in this case we were not. And what it did was it actually made the image a little bit too flat. So I think in most of your cases, you're going to find cylindrical is the answer. Again, unless you happen to be shooting something close and you're also shooting down on it, then you might find spherical works best. So there we go. There's our image ready to be stitched. Let's click on Merge. All right, now here is our raw images stitched together, and you can see it actually looks pretty darn good. If you look down at the name of the file, you see it's this was just shot last week at our fall foliage trip. It was shot with a Fuji X-T4. And if I hit I, now this is a 26 megapixel camera, but notice now the pixel dimensions where we've got 11,874 by 6,340. So let's see, how many pixels, how many megapixels would that be? Let's multiply them together. 6,340. And that's a 75 megapixel image after it's been stitched. So pretty big file at this point. So we don't need to see that anymore. Let's hide that. You can also see it was shot at 35.8 millimeters, but multiply that by 1.5. So let's see what that focal length would be. 35.8 times 1.5. 53, so just short of 54 millimeters. So basically as the eye was seeing it. So the image looks pretty good. In fact, I'm going to hide the left panel by clicking here because we don't need that. Let's get the real estate so we can see it on the screen better. So now let's take a look. Why does this image work? We've got a nice flow. We've got this S. We've got the cascade starting up here, kind of flows down, hits a pool, flows down more, and then comes right past us. It's got leaves on the left and right that kind of keep us within the scene. So everything's looking pretty good. But let's do a little bit better job of getting the viewer to look in the middle. Because it's a little bit light up here. It's a little bit light in here. We want to get, again, we want to subliminally force the viewer to here. We also want to bring up certain colors. So let's come up first and do that. Let's go to Use Saturation Luminance. And let's bring up the saturation. And I'm going to come up to these yellow leaves in the back. Let's make sure they're up. So let's make those nice and saturated. In fact, I'm going to cut to the chase on the sliders. And I'm going to bring the yellow way up. In fact, we'll bring the orange up a bit too, because that's going to affect our leaves, as well as we'll bring up the reds. All right, that helps. So we've got our colors in pretty good shape. Now we can start to paint some areas and decide who needs more color. Actually, while we're here, let's bring up the greens. We've got these mosses and lichens on the rocks. So let's bring up those greens and well. Yes, looking much better. Now let's get a brush. So we're going to come up underneath the histogram, get the brush tool. I'm going to turn off auto mask because I want to get areas. I'm going to click on the O key, which what that does is turns on the mask overlay. So let's do that. And just lets us see where it is that we're painting. So this area is a little too bright. I want to bring that down. I also want to bring down this corner just a little bit, as well as up in here. Make it a little bit smaller area, and I think something about like that, and then maybe a little bit of this water, because again I want the viewer to follow the path of the water. All right, so we'll hit O to toggle that off. Let's bring the exposure down a little bit, and that looks pretty good. And again, as we do that, I'll bring the contrast up. As we do that, what it's doing is it's making the center of the image somewhat brighter, and it's drawing the viewer more into here. And as we have this live, if we decide, well, gee, that's a little too bright, we can continue to add to this. Maybe deep in the corner here. We may end up cropping a little bit of this. And I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe right here. In fact, I think that little bottom is going to get cropped off, but we'll fix it for now. All right, so let's do new. And let's do the same thing, and let's go get some shadows to open up a little bit. So we've got our brush. I'm sorry, hit new. This time we're going to turn on auto mask. Again, I'm going to hit the O on my keyboard so that I can see where it's painting. And just these areas that are a little bit on the darker side, I want to bring those up. Again, we're going to be after getting the viewer to follow the subject. All right, so we've got that. I toggled O. Let's bring the brightness up on that a little bit. That opens up those shadows. And looking pretty good. I think we're getting really very close to being done at this point. Let's do one more. I see one little leaf I want to fix. So let's just get the brush. And I want to hit the O key again. I want to make sure this leaf kind of stands out. It's kind of interesting there. In fact, there's a couple of leaves that are very bright that are spaced around the composition. Unintentionally, just by chance, that I just want to add a little bit more pop to. I think it's just those handful, and I'm going to make those both more saturated and brighter. Because they look like outliers, but for some reason it's interesting. We have the red here, the yellow here, the yellow here, and the yellow here. All right, so let's hit done with that. Now this area up here I still think is a little bit too bright. So let's get our brush again, hit the O key. I'm going to turn off auto mask again. I do want to keep those yellow leaves in the back bright, but this area right in front of them, I think I'm going to want to have it go a little bit darker, including down here around that tree. So let's hit that. Bring the exposure down a bit. There we go. It doesn't have to be a lot, just enough to take a little bit of the brightness so that it's not competing with anything going down through the middle of the image. Looking pretty good. So let's cut to the chase and come down to effects and add a vignette. And I'm going to, now so you can see your vignette, by the way, let's bring it all the way down. So for this image, I think that vignette is a little bit too round. So let's cut back on the roundness. Let's bring it over more to a square. So it's really just darkening the edges, something about like that. And now we can back off on how much is being done. And the beauty of a vignette, when you've done it right, in my opinion, is that you can't really see that it was done until you turn it off. So this is the little switch here. If I turn that off, that'll show us before and after the vignette. And you can see it just does that nice job of darkening the edge just a little bit that further helps you from leaving the image. All right, we're looking pretty good. Now let's take a look. In fact, let's look at it at full screen for a minute. And it's a lovely scene. It's very peaceful, and it's certainly something to be very decorative and nice to be looking at. But there's maybe a little bit too much on the bottom. And the reason I say that is, notice the distance between the bottom here and where this cascade falls, right at the base of this rock. If you look at this vertical height is about equal as from here to here. And I want people to look here more than here. I don't want it to have the same physical height, because then the size of it competes with things that are similar size. So let's come out of our full, and I think it needs to be cropped just a little bit. So let's get the cropping tool, and I want to take as little as possible. I certainly want to keep my yellow leaf on the right there, but I'm thinking just about to there. And again, what that does is it makes this vertical height here less than the thing above it. So let's hit done, and again, the beauty of having done our vignette is it follows the crop. That's what's so great about doing vignettes in Lightroom. So let's take a look at that at full screen. And it's a subtle, small difference, but it does make a difference. Do we need to do anything else? Probably not, but I'm going to do something anyway. I like to do this a lot with this kind of image. I'm going to get an oval, and I'm going to make a big oval right in the middle of the screen, because this is the path of light. So I'm going to rotate this so that it basically follows where we want our viewers to go. And if I hit the O key, you can actually see there it is. And what I want to do is I want to lighten that up a little bit. I'm actually going to bring the highlights down a little, and then I'm going to bring the exposure up a little bit. Again, this is almost like the reverse of that vignette. It's a very subtle brightness change. but it has the effect of, again, drawing the viewer into the middle of the image. You're still free to look around, but you are drawn into the middle of the image first. And to compare that, I'm going to make a virtual copy, and I'm going to reset this one. So let's take a look at the progression, how our edit has gone. In fact, I'm going to show you one more little final tweak that I did on this image right at the very end. So here are the original 6 frames stitched together. As we see, this is before the edits were done. And after the edits were done, this is what it looked like when we stitched those together. So that's the difference between the unedited raw files and then our original edits. And then we took it one step further, actually through all our edits to here. As we looked at this, I took another little fine-tuning look, and I thought, you know what, maybe there's a little too much on the left-hand side of the image, because I don't, again, want to distract the viewer. I want to get the viewer focused on the subject, which in this case is the cascade and the rocks. So I decided to go ahead and crop this a little bit. I brought it over from the left, and in fact, let me just show you what that would look like. So here's our crop. What I ended up doing was bringing it over about to here. This is one of the leaves I wanted to keep, so I left that alone. And as I did this crop, I thought the image was actually a little too thin top to bottom, and I decided I wanted to bring back a little bit. Now this is just a small bit on the bottom that I'm bringing back, but it still has a big effect on the image. And the end result, I'll escape out of that, was this. It causes a slight shift in the image, but since there is less on the left to distract you, the center of the image, all of this stuff, the rocks and the cascades, becomes more dominant over the entire frame, and I think that provides a better result. Let's take a look. And there we go. And you see it fills up, almost completely fills the screen nicely. And we have as much on the left as we need. We've got our leaf just to the left of this tree. We've got a nice bright yellow leaves, the cascade coming through the middle, and just a little bit more of the water on the bottom. Provides a little bit more balance, gets this more centered, and creates a little bit better flow. So I think that works a little bit better, and I think that's going to be our final edit before sending this to print. Hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun, beautiful scene. Lots more for us to do with panoramics soon.